we'd like to welcome you to another It's a Grand Life. Our guest today is going to be a blessing to all of you, especially those of you who need a little bit of help dealing with your grandkids. We've got my pastor on the program today, Justin Warrens from Kensington Community Church in Birmingham, Michigan. Justin, welcome to It's a Grand Life.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Such a joy to be on here and a part of what you've been creating for people. It's absolutely incredible.
Well, Justin, I know you're all about creating community. And between you and your lovely wife, Jenny, you have set the tone at our campus on how to make folks feel welcome, to feel part of something bigger than themselves. And I think in this post-COVID world, that's so important, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think we learned a lot in that in the season of distance and the season of not meeting together even physically. I know many people try to meet digitally like we're doing right now, and there's a
Right.
blessing in that. But the rubbing shoulders with one another in life and walking through some of those, it's called there's been some studies called like the white space of our time, these in between times that aren't so programmed. So often we veer towards isolation in that white space, that little, we fill it with our phone, we fill it with kind of just sitting absent, and there's something deeply needed for a community. And it's partially, I was telling you before as we were getting on here, is we struggle with this idea that we are human doings, that we are constantly doing and achieving and active and physically filling up our schedule, but yet remaining distant from one another. And yet we are actually called human beings. And there's a sense of being together that's really powerful that we're actually hardwired for.
That's 100% true. And that's a real important message to our audience here at It's a Grand Life. You've got to be part of a community. You can't do this on your own. You need to be connected to a small group or a support group, and you would argue that you need to be part of a faith community. But before we get to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about how did you become the lead pastor at the Birmingham campus, and what led you on your faith journey?
Yeah, so I would say, I'll go a little bit back, a little bit of childhood in here. I have my parents were incredible. Really appreciate them. They came through difficult times. I'll share a little bit about that because it kind of connects to the grand life and the grandparent story. But my mom immigrated from Taiwan, and my dad grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and they met, in work, and then they got married, and they moved up to Detroit, and kind of without anybody. So we're kind of in isolation in all reality, and through some difficult experiences, honestly, in the church, they had sometimes we call it church trauma, but they had some painful experiences from individuals, and so they kind of stepped away from faith. They stepped away from church, and we were just kind of the family. I played a ton of soccer, was very active outside all the time, and we traveled many weekends a year, and that was our journey. And then my grandma moved in with us, my mom's mom, and she left Taiwan to come stay with us because her husband had passed, and she wanted to be around family, which is a big part in the Eastern culture. And so she stayed with us. And I remember going to a Chinese speaking church, Mandarin speaking church, and my Mandarin is only so good. I could listen a little bit, but talking about faith and Mandarin, there was no chance. And so I remember we started kind of taking these steps. And after she passed, not long after being with us, my mom said, "Hey, I'd like us to go to church." And so I remember walking into a church, hadn't really been in one for the first 10 years of my life, maybe an Easter service where I napped on the pew. But we went into a church and called Kensington, the one I serve at now. And my dad said, "I'll tolerate it." And my mom said, "I'd like to come back." And that was the beginning of that
Wow.
that journey. But for me, I was a typical kid, went to high school, went off to college, went to Michigan State, got an engineering and business degree, started working in the automotive industry and supply chain, was really enjoying it. And then a friend asked me, "Hey, would you like to disrupt your life and come work with high school students?" And my faith through those years had really changed and transformed because of community. There have been mentors, people along the way who had just invested their time and energy and taken me out to eat and talked about faith and life and through the difficulties. And as a result of that, it kind of pressing into that and some prayer, my wife and I, we left our jobs. We left my automotive job, her teaching job, and we said, hey, we'll try this for 2 years. And we decided to go work with the youth, and that's how we met, actually.
That's right.
I remember the first day you walked into the church and I met you and AJ that day.
Yep.
It was just absolute joy. And and
Life
in
changing
that,
for you, wasn't it? I mean, life
it was
changing.
life changing. It was life changing. Absolutely. And 15, 16 years later, still in that journey, and had some different jobs along the way, and now get to lead our entire community. But it's been small steps along the way of a much longer journey.
It's very interesting that when you talk about your history there, you really were in a grand family before there were grand families. I mean, with grandma living with you and being absolutely integrated in the family setting, and so you can really speak from a point of understanding today and share the what really works and what doesn't work from a grand family perspective. But it's integrating the grandparents into the family setting is absolutely vital in this world right now where we're so detached. So you were at the Kensington Church and you started working with the high schoolers, and then I think you became a campus director after that, and then something else happened, and you became the lead pastor at your own campus. And how has that gone so far?
So I got asked to become the lead pastor. Well, I stepped in to help during February of 2020, and then at that time, and then the world shut down in a very unique way, and we had to adjust and learn. And in the middle of that season, we hadn't even been able to start gathering together physically. The Kensington asked me to stay on and lead the campus. So I feel like I got thrown into craziness, to be honest. And it was an up and down season, a lot of joy, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain. And you felt just the effects of what was happening in our world and even in our community, because for some there was a deep desire to meet together. For others, there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of loss that we were all feeling, and a lot of disconnect. And so as I stepped in to lead, part of what I wanted to do was bring healing in the brokenness that we all experienced in our world. And so as we started to be able to regather together, that was a big part of the journey, is how do we heal together? How do we grow together? How do we relearn how to meet together? Because everything was disrupted, our rhythms, our family, our expectations. It was hard, right? And it's still hard. There's still, it's beautiful moments still are happening right now where people, I think many people would say we're past the pandemic, but there's still the lingering effects that we're dealing with, and those are not past. And I think what's happened is, even every single week, there's somebody who walks in that hasn't been into our church setting or a church in years. And some are coming because something broke during the pandemic, and they're trying to figure out what that loss or sense of hurt is. And then the other thing is, people are starting to rediscover what they've missed. A lot of people stepped away from community almost because of the pandemic and never re-entered back in. And so now it's like almost this rebuilding of relationship, rebuilding of faith, rebuilding of connection. And we're still in it. There's no doubt about it. And there's a lot of healing that we need to go through because of the trauma we all experienced.
And I know in the work setting, there's been a lot of change that has gone on. A lot of folks aren't going into the office. They're working remotely. But it's hard to have a faith community remotely. You can do it at least for a short term, but there's nothing like being a part of a small group or meeting someone in the vestibule after a church service and really sharing what's going on in your heart. So, are you? But you're starting to see folks coming back to the church setting, but it's taken some time, hasn't it?
Oh, for some, yeah. Because everyone's navigating the different traumas they've experienced in it. Like, we have people who lost family members and felt like they were mourning in isolation.
Right.
And that was hard, right? And so that part of wanting to put yourself out there. You have people who what used to be a regular activity, part of the commitment, no longer. And so it's like rebuilding a new rhythm. And we all know this. Every year in January, we all have new rhythms that we're trying to start, and they're difficult. And there's sometimes ones we've been trying for years. And community, faith, schedule, that's no different. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that. And at the same time, there's a deep longing. One of the things, there's a study that was just done by Barna, they're a research group, and I've seen it in the conversations I've had. There, even though all of this is happening, there is a deep sense of longing for answering the question of why do I exist, why do I matter, what's my purpose, what is this deep-seated desire in my heart, and who has the answer to that. And I think a lot of people, what's been really beautiful, there's the pain of digital, but there's also the blessing in some ways. There's been so many people watching us online first for months before they ever enter the door. But what they're asking is this faith that we're talking about similar to maybe a past experience? Like in our story, my family story, the church trauma held my parents out of faith community for decades, right? Like my father, he told me this story when he was younger. He was told, because of the way he was wired, he was asking some questions of the priest or the person leading the class that he was in, and the person said, do not allow yourself to doubt any of the things I've said. You can't ask those types of questions. And in that statement, that person was trying to offer certainty to my dad. And what they actually offered was a vision of something he didn't want to be a part of. How can I not ask questions? How can I not wrestle with faith?
Right.
Like faith requires it. Faith requires the wrestling. And so that trauma led to a disengagement. And that's a small microcosm of many things. But what people are doing is, and I had this conversation with an individual who said, I've been listening to see what it is that you believe about Jesus, what it is you believe about faith, because there's so many different narratives from media to individuals to Trump, and just to go, do I want to be a part of this community and kind of take my next step? And then they enter in, and they've been watching for 6 months before they've entered in. And it's absolutely incredible because there is an opportunity, but now that they've entered in, now they're longing for more community along the journey. They're like, okay, I'm here. Help me in the healing, help me in the understanding. I want to rub shoulders with people. They want to take that next step in conversation.
Well, I want to ask you about the grand families and community. You know, for
Yeah.
like for folks like Kathy and I, we're raising our granddaughter Grace, and we're doing it for the most part alone. We've got family members that help us and whatnot, but I don't know what we would do without our faith community, without the fellowship that we have in our small group, and the folks that support us in the youth department where Grace goes on campus. And I just want to hear your thoughts on how would you encourage folks like Kathy and I to come check out either your church or a faith community, because it's really vital to being a healthy human being. True?
Absolutely. This is a prayer that my wife and I have for our children. And I think it's what you're communicating. We are constantly praying for what we call third party people. Third party people. So in the grand family, right, there's so many needs that children have, like the constant chaos of a child's life. And they need voices of trusted individuals that they can go to, people that they may consider aunts, uncles, other mentors, people who will walk with them when the direct first party people might not be who they go to first. And so we're constantly praying for who are the third party people that my daughters and my son will have access to walk with us. And what I want to be a part of is creating a community where they can see the third party people we trust. Who are the people that we're living life with? Who are the people that we speak about honor and excitement? Who are the people who are living adventures that we long for and support? And those third party people help shape a worldview, help shape a faith view, help shape their identity. Because I think the undisputable reality is there are a lot of narratives that our children are hearing from a lot of people. It's, there's a lot on digital, especially with kids getting cell phones earlier and earlier and smartphones. I mean, the impact of all of these messages that our kids weren't really intended to hear globally, like the things that my children worry about today because of what they've heard globally are so different than the innocence of my childhood. Just from an information, it's unfair in many ways. But we're not going to be able to stop that because people have access. So the one thing we can do is interrupt it. And we interrupt it with incredible third-party people in their lives. And I say that as a person who has raising our children, I need it. Grand families, they need it. Like, there is no doubt we can't do this alone.
Absolutely, 100% true, and just so important to highlight that third party folks. I just love that idea, but for folks and you talked about in your family that there was some trauma in and around your early faith experiences as a family. So
Yeah.
let's say that, can we talk to the grand families that may be listening to this program now? Maybe they're in Las Vegas, or maybe it's my friend down in Alabama who wrote us this week. But they've had a bad faith experience, Justin, and we don't know the details of what went on, but somebody said something or did something or judged them in a way that was really not uplifting. How can we, maybe they've been turned off in the past for whatever reason. How can we get those folks engaged in giving it another chance and giving the faith community another opportunity to be such a vital part of their life?
There was a pastor who went through a friend of mine who went through a pretty traumatic situation as a pastor, and he was hurt by his own church. And he was being interviewed, and it was great perspective. And this is what third party people do. They offer different perspective. And maybe this is something that just offers some perspective. He was being interviewed, and they asked him, "Hey, how are you doing not being bitter at the church? Like, how do you not be bitter?" And I'm sure you've had those conversations. I've had them. There's some real bitterness. And one of the things, I would just say this first. Before I give what his answer was, I want to say I'm sorry for people that happened. Like, it's so sad to me that a God who is known as loving and welcoming and inviting and patient and kind, that has been disrupted in people's minds. That's not who they see God as. That's not who they see Jesus. They don't see the stories of Jesus going to the margins, going with grace, going with a willingness to invite people into a deeper conversation and not judging them at the front door, but actually inviting them deeper. First of all, that breaks my heart. And my hope is that there's a redemption for individuals. And this statement kind of helped me with that. So this individual said, how are you not, he was asked, how are you not bitter at the church? And his response was so beautiful in his perspective. He goes, I'm not bitter at the church because the church didn't hurt me. He said, 5 people hurt me. 5 people hurt me. And they hurt my family. They hurt my kids. Like, there's trauma we're dealing with because of these 5 individuals. But he said, but those 5 individuals don't represent all of the people that I've walked with and all the people I've seen their lives change and all the brokenness I've seen restored. Those 5 people aren't the people that represent the kingdom of God truly. Now, they did represent it, unfortunately, to many, but they aren't Jesus. And that isn't who Jesus is. And being able to have that perspective and kind of zoom out is what happens when you meet with third-party people who help you do that. And my hope is maybe that encourages somebody that whoever hurt them, the trauma that they experienced, sometimes I've said it just simply, that's not Jesus. I'm dealing with that with one of my friends who doesn't want to go to church. He said, I'll hang with you, but I won't go to church. And he has trauma in his past. Undeniable. I mean, some of the worst stuff I've ever heard. And it breaks my heart. But what we get to do is, he lives in California. And he said, if you came out here, I'd go to your church because I know you. And my hope is that we keep having those conversations, and we have every time we can, and just keep elevating the view of who is Jesus, not who are the people who hurt you, and to acknowledge that.
That's absolutely awesome. Now, I wanted to talk about building community and engaging our neighbors for a minute, because you and your lovely wife, Jenny, this is something that is you guys are really, really great at, because everybody needs to be part of a community. We all agree with that. But how have you and Jenny been able to engage your neighbors to enhance the community where you live? And the whole world's been isolated. Somehow you guys cut through that and really build some community right here in Southeast Michigan where you live.
Throw parties, man. That like seriously, bring joy. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like a lot of people lack joy. A lot of people lack memories. A lot of people just like there's just a struggle that we just kind of isolate. Again, that's what we do. So one of my favorite things we do is throughout the pandemic, especially, we figured out ways to do it. Like my buddy Eric, who's a neighbor of mine and was part of our small group years ago. We decided on New Year's Eve, our families decided to do a New Year's Eve ball drop because of the pandemic. You know, people weren't doing so. We did an outdoor ball drop and just built like a huge 2x4 plastic cup ball drop, and all the kids lit it up. And then, we dropped it down at 9 o'clock at night so that we could actually all get some sleep. And then, but then it was so much fun that we put it back up and we did another ball drop at 9:10. We throw mini parties. We do hot chocolates for parades. We do block party in the summer. And to be honest, we invest our money and our time into it. We'll throw these block parties and go, hey, everyone pitch in $10 potluck style. We close down the street and we get a bounce house, we get slides, we get food, we do a cornhole tournament. I mean, we just throw parties. And then what's happened as a result of people being together and being like, oh, that was really fun, we should do that again. And it's led to like our block, about 20 some houses, about 80% will come out to these parties. And now what's happened as a result of it, those relationships have started other things. Like us guys, now we do fantasy football draft in one of the guys' garages. The
great.
Women have a book club now. But what's happened is you always need a spark or a catalyst. And this is what my challenge is. Have courage to, if you want to start creating community, is to create a catalyst for that. What is the catalyst that allows for everything to open? Don't start with the idea of like, we need to be able to have 15 things in a Facebook group. No, just start with a party. Start with grilling in the front porch. Like a friend of mine, she said this back in the years ago. She moved down to Charlotte, and she challenged me actually on this. She said, I used to always love being outside with my coffee, and I'd sit on my back deck. And she goes, one day I just felt challenged to sit on the front porch. She goes, instead of sitting in my backyard, I sat on the front porch. And then all of a sudden I started meeting people while sitting, drinking my coffee. It was a decision. And that led to another conversation with a friend who said, you know what, instead of making s'mores in the backyard, let's make s'mores in the front yard. Let's be willing to destroy a little circle of our grass and not be perfectly manicured with front yard s'mores. And then all of a sudden, neighborhood kids started coming around, families started gathering. So we took that idea and like one day on a Sunday, we just said, hey, we're going to have water balloons and, those Costco packs that really fill up really quick. They're amazing. Water balloons, and we're going to grill. And all of a sudden, people started coming. Just creating little catalysts of relationship. And then you find out things. And what's happened as a result of it, by the way, is people have asked for prayer. Like we've been able to pray with our neighbors. People have shared, like there's a neighbor who shared with us that they're going through some really heartache stuff, some cancer stuff. There's family members who have lost. We've celebrated one of the girls on our neighborhood. She competes in the Special Olympics. And we get to celebrate. So before she went off to go in a competition, we gathered families together and cheered her on as she was about to leave. Like you just find these moments because you hear people's stories. And if you're not in relationship and proximity with them, you won't ever do it. Like it's not something everyone posts on social media.
Right.
And so we're like, when we're all disconnected, we don't do that. But when you start filling that white space with the relationship, you start hearing more. And then you get to move towards one another.
Right.
We end up like one of our friends is like, hey, who wants to go to this concert? I'm going to rent an entire vehicle. We'll all just drive together. And so now we tailgate at a concert together. Those are the things that started happening, but it started with a catalyst, which was a block party.
That is absolutely awesome. It's just so engaging as neighbors and people first, and really breaking down the walls. First. And we're in a culture right now that's so divided. But I didn't hear any of that in what you described. It's over a hot chocolate or a ball drops and a hot dog grilled on the front yard as opposed to the backyard. Man, that makes so much sense. But now when I told you about It's a Grand Life, or before we started this podcast several months ago, you were very supportive about this and very enthusiastic about the project, and even related this to your own grandparent situation for your kids. And you had talked about some distinctives that you thought were something to highlight for engaged grandparents and disengaged grandparents. And do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. One of the things I think about, so I'll do a little bit of alliteration. We've kind of been talking through them a little bit, but there's a few distinctives that I would maybe encourage as a thought, right? And I'll share a few mini stories to kind of help. But one of the things I already talked about is third party people, and all of these are going to have P, right? Like you're, especially in this story with what you're walking through with grandparents, specifically
Right.
in the Grand Life community, like you all were probably in a way third party people that now have become primary people. And so
Right.
you still need third party people.
I like
There's
that
no
too.
doubt about it. You
Yes.
need a third party people, right? And what happens with third party people is you're looking for people to be present and in proximity. So who's going to be engaged, not distant, but present and in proximity? And the story that I think I told you about, and I really am grateful for my parents. Now, my parents are not angels. Like they didn't grow up with me reading the Bible as you heard the story. Like that isn't my experience. Like that was actually third party people who more so led me to Jesus than my family. Right. Like just very honestly, I could tell you 5, 6 third party people who had an impact on my faith. And but here's the thing that I've seen the redemption in my family story as a result of this journey of faith. And one of the things my dad said to me, and it helped me, like my grandparents on my dad's side weren't in proximity with us. Like when they retired, they moved. Like they left and they had their place down in Florida and they had a trailer that they would ride around, and they would just go on vacations. It was their time. And my dad said something to me. He goes, I was really sad that my parents never invested in your guys' life. They just didn't seem that interested. Like we do a thing here, Thanksgiving, whatever. But like I remember one time, and I think I told you this story. I remember one time like they came to babysit us, and my grandma was trying to convince me to go to bed at 7 o'clock during the summertime. And I was like 12. I'm like, it's sunlight out. They're like, well, I want to be done for the night. And that communicates a lot.
Yep.
Like that communicates so much to a kid. And so my dad, I really was thankful. He chose when they were dreaming about they were moving out of our childhood home and they're relocating, but they relocated close. And they decided to buy a place a little bit like 30 minutes away from us where we are today. But they're like, we want to build a home where you want to be and where you want to bring your kids. And so they have tailored their home to be a place for grandchildren to have excitement. They decided to buy a place near some water. So it's got, a place with, kayaks, and it was a whole rundown place. It's taken like 20 years to keep refixing and all that. But they got kayaks, they got little things here. My dad and I built a sand pit for the kids. Like there's just been an investment to be in proximity. And it allows them to then choose, hey, I want to be a part of my grandkids soccer game. I want to be like, it's just a really amazing, right? And it's been this journey of redemption, and I'm really grateful for it. But it's been a way of redeeming a story where there wasn't proximity or presence. And so that's where one of the things I just challenge the Grand Life community is like, how are you creating proximity and presence with third party people? Because it's changed, right? Like you're
Yep.
looking for, and you talk about it, Craig. I know it. That community of small group, your engagement in the church, you're creating that third party people. I think of some of the ways that you are serving today, so that Grace gets opportunities to serve in other spaces and be connected to third party people. You've made choices to open up your home. You just did it for an entire group of students. You created space. So you created a space where other people were bringing their kids, and
Right.
then relationship grows. That's proximity and presence, right? And that's with third party people. And then the thing that I'll add in it, when you do that, you offer people perspective. And that's one of the things that I've been really grateful for, is that other people will offer perspective about faith and life and about the hills and the valleys that we all are running through. And we need it. Like my parents, one of the things that did happen in the pandemic that was so beautiful, we'd sit down to eat dinner, and my kids would just ask my parents, tell me about your childhood, tell me about something, tell me a story. And we
Great.
would just spend time telling stories. No phones, nothing else, just telling stories. And in the telling of stories, sometimes like my mom, she's an incredible cook. She's got all these Chinese dishes that are unbelievable. She would teach my kids how to make dumplings, handmade dumplings. handmade egg rolls, and she's just telling stories of her childhood. And my kids are getting perspective. Like my mom's family, my grandparents actually had to flee from China to go restart their life in Taiwan.
Hmm.
Right. So one of the things that I think we live in our society today, we have all this access and we don't know the perspectives of the past. So she is, talking about my family having to restart from nothing, starting as basically a refugee in Taiwan, restarting their life, fleeing. I mean, they had to walk over 40 hills and mountains to get to the boats to be able to flee to Taiwan. Like, absolutely incredible. And my grandma did that while pregnant and then
Oh,
having a child. I mean, it is an unbelievable story. But what it gives my children is perspective.
right.
Allows you to talk about gratitude, allows you to talk about gratefulness, allows you to talk about legacy. And it reminds me of, like, it allows us to kind of learn from a bigger story than the one we're just in today. It elevates all of our perspective. And so we do that, tell those stories. So those third party people with proximity and presence offer perspective. And I think when it comes to faith, it's so huge. You take all of those and it's the same thing. You get a better perspective of faith.
Well, you absolutely do. And Justin Warrens, I want to thank you so much for being on It's a Grand Life today. You hit on everything we wanted to talk about. And I just hope that our listeners will take a step of faith and get out of their living room or their family room and engage in the faith community. And they don't necessarily have to come to our church, but just to engage in the faith community and be a third party person and find some third party folks to help you as you raise your grands, because you have your
Yeah.
hands full, but there are
Yeah.
folks out there that want to help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, let me finish with one last maybe word of encouragement.
Yes, sir.
There's a scripture, 2 Timothy 1:5, and there's a person in the Bible known as Timothy. He becomes a leader of the church. He's known. He gets discipled by this guy Paul. Some of the heroes of our faith, if you would call. But what I love is there's this very subtle thing. And when I was thinking about you and I was thinking about this community, I couldn't help but think about this one verse out of 2 Timothy 1:5. This is Paul, who mentors Timothy later in life. But he says this. He says, I am reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I'm persuaded now lives in you also. There is a redemption story that is there. And I am so grateful for the ways, the sacrifices of this community and the ups and downs, but there is beauty of the third party person. Even in Timothy's story, the third party person who would come later was Paul, and he would disciple him, and Timothy would become one of the youngest leaders in the church. And whether you believe in Jesus or not, I want people to hear the power of the family legacy. And it reminds me of a quote that Andy Stanley said years ago. He said, your greatest contribution to the kingdom of God may not be something you do, but someone you raise. And I hope that perspective encourages all of us today, that that's what we're called to do. Not human doings, but human beings. And we get to be a part of a beautiful, grand life alongside of the journey with people. And pray blessing over your community and healing in the difficulty and peace.
Justin, thank you so much. You've really laid out the whole mission and purpose of the Grand Life, and it's all about serving the underserved and serving others, being a third party person. I hope you'll join us again down the road as we continue to engage in this subject of how do we support the Grand families, and just appreciate you so much and all the work you're doing in the faith community, encouraging all of us. And those of you who are in Southeast Michigan, if you want to see what a little slice of heaven looks like, join us on Sunday morning at Kensington Community Church of Birmingham, because everybody's there and everybody's welcome. But thank you so much for being on It's a Grand Life. Really appreciate it. Remember to never waste your pain. Your story can help others. That's the whole point of It's a Grand Life. Please reach out to me. I can be a blessing to you and pray for you, or help you connect to free resources that can make your journey a little easier. God can use your situation to bless others, even halfway around the world. Together, we have hope. And as my own grandma used to say, and she was always quoting biblical promises to me, but this one from Isaiah 26:3, he will keep him or her in perfect peace, whose mind is fixed on him because he trusts in him. Please make sure to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. I look forward to talking to you again real soon, but remember, with God's help, It's a Grand Life.